We are live, hopefully. we should be online. So I'm hoping we're there. Anybody who's there on live chat, please let us know that you're there. Be aware there is a YouTube delay. There's about a 20-second delay from when we talk to what you hear. So sometimes we might be a bit behind on the comments and that side of things. But hopefully we're here and we're live. So this is Seaward Live. This is our first live stream event. I've got with me my colleague, Mr. Richard Slade. Hello, Richard.
Hello, everyone.
So I'm Kevin Smith. I'm category manager for test and measurement equipment at Seaward. I look after the product development, maintaining the product portfolio, new product ideas, all that sort of thing. So the phrase I always use is everything you like about our products and everything you don't like is basically my fault from that side of things. So I look after Seaward products globally. That's mainly PAT testers, high voltage, solar, all that sort of thing really falls under my my remit from that side of things. My colleague Richard Slade is field sales manager for the UK. So Richard looks after the commercial side of things within the UK, and obviously he's our face of PAT testing. You've probably seen him on videos and all those sort of things. So, yeah, you know, Rich has been with us, what, 16 years now, Rich?
Yeah, 16 years, 22 in the industry, 16 years at Seaward.
So there you go. So wealth of experience there. I'm a new boy. I've only been at Seaward about 6 years, and in my current role about 3. So, yeah, so we're going to try and do our best to help you out. Obviously, this wasn't really what we planned, actually. Coronavirus has taken over and we're both working from home. We were hoping to be together in the studio, so a bit more of a grand event. So we've, you know, in the traditional British spirit, we've cobbled together and we're both in our home offices now. So forgive me having the sofa behind me from that side of things, and you can see Richard's got his little shelves there and that sort of thing in his home office as well. So bear with us a bit on that one, but we are all mucking in with the coronavirus and trying to do the best we can from that side of things. And just mentioning the coronavirus really from that side of things, we understand it's quite a tough time for everybody, and everybody's sort of having a lot of upheaval with this. So from a Seaward point of view, obviously we're here to support you. We're very much working. So please get in touch. You know, we've got loads of time now to interact with people, try and do more educational events, and really try and support. Well, there's a bit of downtime with training and, you know, all of those sort of things. Or if you just want to chat about PAT testing, you know, feel free to get in touch with us. We're making ourselves very much available now for our customers, and this is one part of doing that really. So hopefully we'll have more live events on YouTube coming up from that side of things. So really what we're going to do is we've got some comments that have come in advance. We've got some questions that we've had in advance and a couple of topics that people have asked us to talk about in advance as well. So Rich is going to be the question master, and I'm going to be trying to answer some of the questions. But really, just in advance, we've got a lot of questions and we won't be able to answer everything within the time. If there is any specific questions that we don't get round to, please reach out to us on social media. We don't necessarily always see what's in the chat window, and obviously because we haven't got everybody's details off YouTube, we can't follow up through YouTube really from that side of things. So if you want us to follow up on anything, reach out to either myself or Richard. We're both active on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, etc. But if you want to actually email us, email events@seaward.com. That's the email address we're using for these live events. So if you get in touch with us through that, we'll be able to follow up with you afterwards as well. So apologies if we don't mention your specific things today. We'll try our best to get through them all. But if it's a tech supporty thing or something very specific, we're more than happy to follow up and do a one-to-one session with you personally. So yeah, so just apologies in advance that we won't necessarily get through everything. So where do you want to start, Rich?
Well, just having a scan through. Good evening, everyone, and thank you. As you can see, lots of questions and hellos, and you can hear us. So good start there. I suppose one of the main ones that came through quite a lot really on the pre-registered questions was sort of based around the 5th edition code of practice and sort of a bit of an update as to what might happen in there. So yeah, Kev, obviously, as you're part of the committee that contributes and creates the new 5th edition, no better person really to give everyone a bit of an update.
Yeah, no problem. So all of last year, I've been sitting on the committee that writes the code of practice. I've been representing our trade organisation, Gambika, on there, and really we've been working through all of last year to update the 4th edition code of practice to the 5th edition. So some of you may have seen middle of the summer, there was a draft for public comment came out, and I think we got about 400 comments came back. And then we had several meetings to go through and look at all the comments and try and get everything sort of put together into a new document. Obviously, it was 2012 that we actually got the 4th edition. So now we're trying to, sort of rewrite that and create a code of practice that's fit for 2020s really from that side of things. So it's been a really great experience being on the committee and working with all the different stakeholders to try and, create a code of practice that's fit for the industry. Just to tell you where we are at with that currently, the final draft has actually gone out to the committee, and we had to put our final comments in by the end of last week, by the 20th. And we've actually got a meeting on, I think it's Thursday this week now. We've got a teleconference to go through the final comments and actually just have a look at the final document. And then what we're being told by the IET, I mean, obviously, we haven't planned the coronavirus in this, so we'll see what happens. But really, once the final document is complete, and I think the intention is to try and do that by the end of the month, that then goes off to publishers, and I believe it takes probably about 3 months for the publishers to actually create the books and get the books out there. So we're expecting probably a June-ish launch, but obviously that's notwithstanding the coronavirus. So there could be some extra wiggle room in there, shall we say, from that side of things. Hopefully I'll know more later this week, and if you keep an eye on our social media, we'll try and keep people updated with the changes. Obviously, with regards to the changes, there's quite a bit gone on in there really in the code of practice. A lot more emphasis on risk assessment. The table 7.1, the table of frequencies has gone, with the emphasis of looking more at risk assessment and getting duty holders to actually assess the risk. It was always the responsibility of duty holders to assess the risk, but really what's happened is that people have just gone with the table and said, oh, well, the table says this. And fortunately, trying to make a table that's fit for all environments is very, very difficult. So really what we said, back to basics, do the risk assessments, that's a legal requirement. Make sure you've assessed the risk, put it back in the duty holder's court to get the frequencies right. And hopefully that makes it more fit for purpose and allows everybody to tailor it better for their needs. Otherwise, in the code of practice, a few other changes, things like, what can I come out with off the top of it? We've moved things around a bit. We've tried to make the actual flow of the book a bit better, tried to remove a bit of the repetition that's in there. So it actually flows better and reads better as a document. We've actually got another appendix in there that covers a bit of basic electrical theory. Again, trying to make it more accessible to people. A bit more stuff on counterfeit and substandard equipment. There's a flow chart in there now actually covering testing. So from that side of things, the actual sequence of tests is in there in a flow chart, which is better. We've got some sample risk assessments. We've got more examples of different bits of equipment for visual inspections, half-sleeved earth pins on plugs and plugs with no fuses and all that sort of thing. So it is a good document, and I think it's been well written from that side of things. So I think that the team have done well on that. So hopefully we get that in a couple of months, and Seaward will be doing a lot of events, a lot of content based around that. So we'll talk about that more. This isn't really meant to be a 5th edition live stream, but just giving you an update of where we really are for the industry. And I think it's our 18th edition. The electrical installation industry have done a lot with 18th edition. And the 5th edition is really that for our industry. So it's up to us to make the most of it really and use it as a an opportunity to sort of promote and grow the industry from that side of things. Is that okay, Rich? Was that enough? Have we got any questions that we need to talk about?
Well, I think one of the grey areas, I think, if I'm right in saying that has been added in, is a section on testing sort of IT server racks and things like that, which has always been a bit of a grey
Yeah, there's a
area. And
whole appendix
aside
been
from
added in
that, I think
about
a lot
testing rack
of
mounted
people,
equipment, and how you deal with testing rack mounted equipment, because obviously it doesn't move, it's connected, it's not the same level of risk. Generally, it's in server rooms that are locked away. So yeah, there's a whole appendix been added in for rack mounted equipment as well. So that's good for people who deal with server rooms and things like that.
I think that pretty much covers, maybe apart from sort of terminology, there's a lot of classifications and equipment types, haven't there, that have been brought in now to fall in line with other standards
Yeah, I
and
mean, I
various
think
bits and pieces like that.
terminology is a fun one. We finally got rid of the word portable appliance testing. PAT testing has gone. God knows what we'll do as an industry now. But yeah, the word portable appliance testing's still there, but the actual portable bit's gone. Portable, movable, handheld, all that's gone. It's just equipment. And interestingly enough, the word appliance technically only applies to domestic appliances. So the word appliance has actually gone, and we just talk about electrical equipment testing. So it's interesting to actually see how the terminology's been opened up more, and we've got rid of some of these old meaning terms, really, like portable and stuff like that, that's confused people for years. So again, huge changes.
Just whilst we're on that subject, so I've seen Julie's just kindly sort of messaged through saying that there's sort of case studies or examples to refer to rather than just obviously what was the table.
Yeah, actually, what we've done is they've added in two case studies into the appendices, and what it does, it gives two different scenarios. I think one's a shop and maybe one's a factory, something like that. I'd have to have a look. But what they've done is they've given example risk assessments. So they've actually said, the work, the stuff in the office, this is how this is done. The stuff in the workshop, the stuff in the factory, and they've actually given examples in there. So there's two sort of filled out examples. I think as Seaward, we'll probably try and do a few more. We'll try and do a lot more content on risk assessment, because I think that's where a lot of the questions are going to come from. But yeah, there's definitely two in the appendices in there, which actually give worked examples for two example companies.
Excellent. But I think as well as worth noting, as we'll see nearer the time of the confirmation and sort of publication and various things like that, we will be obviously running workshops and webinars as we always have done. So yeah, definitely keep an eye out for those, and we'll keep you posted sort of as and when we get those ready to go live. I mean, if we move on to one of the next ones, again, another one subject that sort of pops up quite a lot in sort of workshops and webinars and forums is obviously the testing of sort of sensitive equipment and IT equipment. So I don't know, Kev, if there's anything there you can sort of talk around on sort of best practice and what to do, not to do, and what to look out for. Really.
Yeah, I'll try my best. I mean, this is one that comes up a lot, and it's we get asked this by all sorts of people, even people who are very experienced in the industry, and it really comes down to the question is, should I test at 500 volts? This is the thing. Should I do an insulation resistance test on IT equipment at 500 volts? And the textbook answer for that has always been, as long as it complies with BSEN 60950, then it's okay for a 500 volt test. Now that's the textbook answer. Anything else, really, you'd go for a 250 volt test, or you'd do something like a leakage test, touch current or protective current, or substitute alternative leakage instead. Now, I think that guidance has gone all right for years, and I always say I know people who test at 500 volts all day, every day on all sorts of equipment, and they've never had a problem. But I also know people who've blown up equipment doing a 500 volt test. So it is very difficult. How do you make that decision? And I think the guidance is right. If equipment complies with BSEN 60950, it will have had a flash test in the factory, which means it's suitable to be tested at 500 volts. No problem at all. I think the problem is how do we know equipment actually complies with that standard? Sometimes you'll get substandard equipment that actually, it might have that standard even printed on it, but actually has it ever been tested by the manufacturer? Does it meet standards? Does it meet specifications? Other problems you can experience with sensitive equipment is, have we actually disconnected peripherals? So something like, you know, a network cable or something like that may be connected to equipment, and under certain conditions, we could potentially damage something connected to it. So the piece of equipment we're checking, you know, the power supply on the PC might be fine. That power supply might be okay, but that's actually the cheapest bit in the equipment. So actually getting rid of the power supply is not as big a problem as tapping everything else. So I think sometimes we just have to use common sense. And my guidance has always been sort of Kev's rule on this has always been: would you fancy buying the customer another one if you were to blow it up? And for me, anything that's, you know, like your kettles, your toasters, your leads, hair dryers, and all the normal stuff, 500-volt test is going to be perfect. But if you're going to a customer sensitive server rack, expensive AV equipment, all that sort of thing, I'd always test at 250 volts just to be on the safe side. 99.999% of times you'll be absolutely perfect doing 500-volt test, but you just got to have that little bit of common sense that potentially, you know, the 500-volt test could damage specific types of equipment. And I have come across people who have done that. So it is possible. It's very rare, but it is possible. Interestingly enough, in the new code of practice, the old code of practice used to say either do an insulation resistance test or a test at using a leakage test, touch current, potential conductor current, or something. And it was very much either or. Now the new code of practice, the flowchart in the new code of practice actually says you must do an insulation resistance test, and if you want to do a leakage test as a supplementary test, then you can do that. But it does specify that you must do either a 250 or a 500-volt test on everything. The logic is, you know, if you do an insulation resistance test, you'll probably pick up faults that you may not have been aware of when you carry out the leakage test. And obviously, the leakage test, you're applying 230 volts. So the problem is you're applying 230 volts to equipment potentially unsafe conditions. So you could probably pick that up with an insulation test first. So now the 5th edition is, rather than either or, it's insulation test either at 250 or 500, and then a leakage test if you want to. So it's a different option really from that side of things. Hopefully that clarifies it a little bit, Rich.
Yeah, no, actually, I mean, I just again still scanning through some of the comments. Answering one of the questions, obviously, when the 5th edition is finalised and has gone to publication, yes, we will be producing an up-to-date 5th edition version of our guide to PAT testing book there. There's a comment, Kev, I think that Kieran has made on here that I think it's going to come up quite a lot with table 7.1 is sort of concern that there'll be a lot of grey area and greater discussion without the table. I mean, I think the risk assessment samples that I've seen does sort of the same job. It does replace the table. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the duty has always been risk assessment. And I think what people have done is they've taken the table, and the table has always said over the top initial frequencies. And the frequencies were only meant for new equipment where you've got no data, and they were meant for if you did the user check and you did the formal visual inspection and you did the combined inspection and test, then those frequencies stacked up. But you know, in the best case scenario, there was only about, I don't know, say 8 or 10 different categories that were covered. You know, there was a lot of places that weren't covered. And actually, what tipped it really was we had evidence from some big PAT testing contractors that were actually part of the committee. And they actually provided evidence of the tests. And they're actually saying that the amount of failures they were seeing was not proportionate to the table. What the table was saying didn't reflect the risk in the modern environment. And I think the worry is that duty holders were just going, well, the book says, you know, 5 years, so I'm going to do it 5 years. Well, aren't you best assess the risk? No, I'm just going to do 5 years because that's what the book says. So I think the problem was that, yes, it was easy, and I think everybody would have just liked the IET to say every 12 months for everything. But it wouldn't be fit for purpose. You know, 12 months is too long for high-risk equipment. It's not long enough for low-risk equipment. It depends on the environment. And what we're doing now is giving the duty holders the flexibility to actually risk assess things properly. Yes, there does need to be more guidance. Yes, there does need to be more examples. And I think from a Seaward point of view, we can help with that. Obviously, things like the Apollo and Pat Guard are designed originally around risk assessment principles as well, anyway. But no, we can definitely help with that. And I think once the industry gets used to it, I think we can do that. I mean, the other thing to be aware of is there is guidance from people like the Hire Association for Europe have got their guide, Plaza have got guides. So there's loads of different organisations that have given specific industry-related frequencies. The other thing to bear in mind, of course, with risk assessment is what does the insurance company say? What does your local authority say? All of those things, which actually override generally your own assessment of risk anyway, unless obviously you think it's more dangerous, if you're going to do it more often. But there is a lot of factors in there, and just having a duty holder go table, read off, done, just wasn't really cutting it. It wasn't really assessing the risks, and it wasn't really fit for purpose.
Just whilst we're on the risk assessment there, Kev, Kieran was commenting there, with the current risk assessment tool in his Apollo 500 meet the fifth, as well as replacing table 7.1?
Yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't actually comply with the fifth edition, because obviously the fifth edition is just saying assess risk. And the way the tool is done in the Apollo, it considers all of the factors that are still going to be in the fifth edition. In fact, there's actually no, it's actually better than, it lines up with the fifth edition, probably better than the fourth edition, because there's a few extra factors in there. So yeah, I mean, the fifth edition just says assess risk. The Apollo assesses risk. I mean, what we are going to look at doing, but again, coronavirus willing, is we want to have a look at potential firmware update as well for the fifth. So we'll probably be changing some of the test sequences stuff in there. We're just going through the process now of really speccing that out, because until the book is actually finalised, we can't really spec out exactly what changes we hope to do to the products. But we will look at fifth edition really for the Apollos, or at least an updated clone file, which gives you the ability to fine tune your test. We're working on it.
Excellent. So please do keep your live questions coming through. There's lots coming through, and they're great, sort of working their way through them. One of the pre-registered questions we had was from a chap called Christopher. And Christopher was asking about, he used to have an old Seaward IT 1000 that actually did sort of the run leakage tests, and has since moved to one of the Prime Test 100s, and has noticed a difference in sort of readings on the leakage test versus readings on the alternative or substitute leakage test that you get on the Prime Test 100. What's your thoughts on that, Kev?
Yeah, it's always an interesting one. It's one we get on tech support all the time. And it really just comes down to an understanding of the difference between substitute and alternative leakage and mains powered leakage. Substitute and alternative leakage is important because it's an AC test. So being an AC test, it will actually pick up faults that you don't necessarily spot with a DC test, like an insulation resistance test. So it is a useful test. The difference with the substitute alternative leakage, it's done at 40 volts AC, and the readings are actually scaled up to what you would get at 240 volts, 230, 240 volts. Now, the way it's done is actually it's done by joining line and neutral together and then measuring with the 40 volts AC between there and earth. So that's either the earth pin of the plug for class 1 appliances or the probe on class 2 appliances, just like you normally a touch current. Now, the reason you see discrepancies on some equipment is because line and neutral are joined together and then the measurements to earth. So if we've got, say, capacitors between line and earth and neutral and earth, we're actually putting those in parallel when we're taking the substitute measurement. So what you actually see is artificially high leakage, because we're measuring the line leakage and the neutral leakage together. So it's effectively adding those leakages together, so you get a doubling effect. So something like a washing machine where they've got components in there, you quite often see this. The other issue that you get with something like a Prime Test 100 is because under the 4th edition code of practice, portable and handheld equipment was only a 0.75 for class 1. So it's a 0.75 milliamps current for portable handheld equipment, movable portable handheld. You actually allowed for things like a washing machine, stationary equipment, up to 3.5. But obviously, being a simple tester, sort of basic manual PAT tester, you can't change the limits. So with something like the Apollo, you can obviously change the limits, or a Prime Test 250, 250 plus, you can change the limits. Whereas with the Prime Test 100, you always get low limits, just being on the safe side. However, obviously you manually record the results. So whatever leakage reading you get, you can make a judgment of whether that's safe or it isn't. And obviously, if there is any doubt, you can do a mains powered test with a PAT tester if you want to. But generally, it's just understanding the readings that you get as a substitute alternative leakage test. So that hopefully explains Chris's question.
Excellent. I say one thing I think that's always been a very common question that's coming through and has been, and is still very much sort of overlooked, I think, in people's risk assessments. And so obviously since the release of the 4th edition is the testing of fixed appliances. Now, obviously, they're notoriously harder to test because obviously you don't have the convenience of the plug top to plug in your PAT tester. So, I mean, advice there, Kev, on sort of, you know, how you go about testing fixed appliances, what the considerations, what sort of training would you require, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, fixed appliances has always been an area that's, I'd say, a grey area, but a misunderstood area within PAT testing. The electricity work regulations just says we've got to test all electrical systems. So that's anything from a pocket calculator to a power station, anything that fits within the workplace. You know, any electrical equipment has fallen within PAT testing. But I think the myth has always been it's only anything with a plug on. Now, hopefully, under the 5th edition, we tried to clarify this a bit by just talking about electrical equipment testing. And actually, that doesn't really matter whether it's fixed or permanently connected, like a hand dryer maybe, or whether it's a kettle, a toaster, or a drill, you know, the normal PAT testing. So fixed equipment has always been this area where generally it's got missed out, you know, something like cookers, hand dryers, or all that sort of stuff, even more industrial stuff. Fixed plant equipment has always got missed out. So it is something that was re-emphasised in the 4th edition. There was a lot more put in the 4th edition. And we've sort of re-emphasised it again in the 5th edition now to try and make people more aware of it. I always say fixed equipment or permanently connected equipment is a good opportunity really for those doing PAT testing to actually get trained, get upskilled, to be able to offer that as an extra service, because obviously you can charge a bit more doing fixed equipment testing, you know, another string to your bow. I recently see on LinkedIn the PATA guys have been to a training, Sparky Ninja, get trained up on being able to do fixed equipment and being able to isolate fixed equipment and things like that. So there are courses out there. There is training you can do. The other thing is, I think electricians are probably missing the trick, because if you're doing an EICR as an electrician, you're already isolating the circuits, you're already doing the tests. So really adding fixed equipment testing to your EICR is another thing you can charge for. It's another service you can offer. You really, again, don't miss that trick. You know, this stuff does need doing. It is in the workplace. It does pose a risk. It does testing. It's just more difficult to do because as you haven't got a plug and socket test with. Seaward's Apollo tester has got the point-to-point function, which is really useful. You can put 2 croc clips on and actually test between the spur and the equipment, things like that, without actually having to rewire it or put it in all sorts of other options. So the point-to-point test works really well for doing fixed equipment. But the most important thing with fixed equipment, obviously, is the safe isolation and making sure you've isolated it safely first. So always make sure you've got suitable competence in safe isolation of equipment. That's where the danger comes in. Fixed equipment, the tests are pretty much the same, the visual inspections are the same, but it's just a matter of, 1, how do you isolate it, and 2, how do you connect the tester to be able to carry out the tests. Like I say, something like the Apollo, perfectly designed for doing fixed testing.
Excellent, cheers. Go on. Just have a look at a couple of the other questions coming through there and pre the event. Is Paul's very kindly sent through a couple for us. Yeah. If I can just take the opportunity, Paul, obviously you're here live with us, is you did ask a question and a comment on sort of testing fridges and microwaves and how to do those correctly. If you could sort of kindly just sort of comment through to sort of say what you are maybe doing now, and then Kev can obviously elaborate on that and talk you through that. But you did have another question, Paul, about testing coffee machines there, Kev, when you sort of can't always find metal for an earth reading.
Yeah, this is a typical question really. We get a lot of class 1 equipment that is actually class 1. It's got earth metal parts inside it. Part of the safety of the equipment is by having earth metal parts inside it, but you can't actually get to them. Now, back in the day, we did all sorts of dodgy practice, getting a crock clip on a screwdriver and poking it into the back, or a paper clip, or all sorts of horrendously dangerous things. Nowadays, the best practice that we advocate for that is if you're actually carrying out a test on a piece of equipment that you know is class 1. Obviously, if you can disconnect the lead, you can test the lead, the kettle lead, the IEC lead, you can test that separately, so you can fully check that. The equipment you can still do an insulation test on. You can still do a leakage test on if you want to. You just can't do the earth continuity test. So obviously, visually inspect as much of it as you can, the earth path, to make sure, as far as you're concerned, the earth path is there. But then we just say omit the earth continuity test and record a comment to make the duty holder aware. They might want to correct the risk assessment to actually shorten the interval, because obviously the earth continuity important safety feature, can't verify it by test. You are just assuming that it's there and assuming that it's okay. But you can't test it. Sometimes people will dismantle equipment to get at it, but generally that's seen as, more risk and more likely to damage the equipment, or, interfere with the results in any way, really, by taking it apart and making that together again. So realistically, common guidance is for things like that. If you can't access the earth, but it's class 1, there's no class 2 symbol on there, and like that, then just omit the earth continuity test, put it in a comment, and do all of the other tests. There's no reason you can't do all the tests on class 1. Generally, the insulation resistance carried out at the plug top. All you can't do is get the earth continuity. Now, I know that's difficult if you've got a battery powered tester, because generally it wants a continuity. And I know a lot of times people say, test it as class 2. But again, that isn't doing the test right, because you're testing to the probe when you do insulation resistance class 2, not the earth pin, and obviously there's different pass fail limits. So don't test it as class 2. You should really be doing just a class 1 test. Now, obviously, something like the Apollo, you can write a sequence for class 1 with those parts. You can do that test normally and carry on with it. So you can write sequences where the more advanced testers come into their own, being able to deal with this. But yeah, it is a problem a lot of people come across, and current guidance is just omit the earth continuity test, check everything else you can, record it in your comments, and allow the duty holder to risk assess it accordingly.
Excellent. Another question that had come through there was from a Sam. So hopefully Sam's with us and here for his question is, Sam's asked about sort of the testing process for mobile phone chargers. I mean, we say mobile phone chargers, but I'm guessing it's sort of any extra low or extra low voltage equipment is really, from a testing point of view, does it require PAT testing, just a visual only? Is it risk assessment?
Yeah, I mean, this is again another one that we typically come across a lot, and it really depends on what test you've got and how, what level of test you can do. It is difficult if you've got something that's a class 2 mobile phone charger. Effectively it's just 230 volts going into the pins, some circuitry inside, and USB out. You're very limited if there's no exposed metal work. You're very limited on what sort of tests you can do on that. Insulation resistance tests and things like that, you're very limited for exposed parts. Even touch current or leakage tests, again, if it's class 2, there's virtually nothing you can do on that. So generally my advice would be, if it's just a class 2 charger, mobile phone charger, it's got to be a very, very thorough visual inspection. Really have a very good look over it, because a lot of times the problems with these is they're substandard, dodgy. The actual safety protection in there for the output side is, a couple of diodes or something like that. There's just, you've got to be very, very careful with these type of things. I've been reading up more and more about things like iPads and you know, laptops and things getting damaged by dodgy chargers, substandard chargers. So just be very, very careful. I would always say, really, company policy and risk assessment that you should really be getting new in chargers. But I know that's an if on, that's a sort of wish list type things. But there is so many problems by overcharging and surging. But the actual test that you can do on that is very, very limited. So it is really a very visual inspections try and cut out the chance of getting substandard and counterfeit equipment. Really. So if it's class one, you've got a few more options. But generally, mostly class two, unfortunately, are very limited. Obviously.
Excellent. Just moving on to a couple of producty ones here. Thank you for joining us here, Paminda. Paminda's actually just sort of messed through. He's got an old Robin PAT tester, and he's sort of looking at the sort of the prime test 100, 250, and potentially the 250 plus.
Yeah.
So what advice could we give Paminda there, Kev, about sort of those three products, PAT Mobile, and what to maybe consider when making his decision?
Yeah, I mean, really, the difference between the Prime Test 100, the 250, and the 250 plus. 250 and 250 plus are very similar from a testing standpoint. The difference between the Prime Test 100 and the 250, 250 plus is really the 100 is a purely battery powered tester. So it runs off batteries. You can't connect it to the main. It'll do a 500 volt insulation resistance test. It'll do the earth continuity test with ZAP technology, substitute alternative leak test. But what it won't do is a 250 volt insulation test. So we've talked about sensitive and surge protected equipment. So again, you haven't got that option to go down to 250. Depends on what you're testing, might be fine. But if you're looking at more sensitive equipment, you probably want the volt or surge protected equipment. Probably want the 250 volt test. Also RCDs, the 250, 250 plus do RCD testing. So nowadays in the code of practice, it says that we should be doing RCD testing, actually checking the tripping times. So again, if you've got plug-in RCD, things like that, really that's where you need to change over to something like a 250 to get the RCD testing functionality. You can also change the pass-fail limits on the 250, 250 plus for the leakage as well. So again, it's really that difference between a battery power tester and a mains powered tester. One thing I didn't mention, obviously 250 plus will do mains powered leakage tests as well. So your protective conductor current and your switch current tests. So it'll actually drive the equipment to the mains powered test. So it really just depends on the number of tests you're doing, what type of equipment you're doing, and really where you come into. The difference between the 250 and the 250 plus, the 250 plus actually stores results. So you can actually store results on the 250 plus. Now, when I say store results, it'll store up to 999 test results. You can then output that as a spreadsheet, as a CSV. Then you've still got to go in and type up your, add in things like site location, stuff like that in there. So it is a basic downloading test of the. But testing wise, it's very similar on that. Is that about it, Rich? Is there anything else I've missed?
No, I think that pretty much covers everything between the three in the range there. There's some more obviously questions coming through. One that was pre-asked as well before the event was, and again it's always comes up quite a bit in our workshops we carry out and forums like that, is the PAT testing competency. Can we shed a bit of light on that? It's always been a bit of a woolly area, shall we say?
PAT testing competency. Oh God, yes. This is a question we get a hell of a lot. Is what course do I need to go on to make me competent? What tests do I need to do to make me a competent PAT tester? Generally in the UK, competence falls under electricity at work regulations, like most other things we cover. Under Regulation 16. Regulation 16 just says you've got to have enough knowledge and experience to be able to avoid death. Now, obviously, if anything goes wrong, you've got to be able to prove in a court of law that you had enough knowledge and experience to avoid danger. And chances are, if something's gone wrong, you didn't. So it's a difficult sort of self-proving case from that side of things. So it's always a difficult one. And the other thing to realise with competency is there isn't really a set limit. it's sufficient. You've got to have enough for the job you're doing. So the example I always give is if you're a cleaner. So we've got a cleaner. He tests his vacuum cleaner once a year with a very basic, go no go tester like a prime test 50. How much knowledge and experience does that person need to be able to test one piece of equipment once a year? Simple PAT test. Now, generally, half an hour's training, you go through it a few times. That's enough knowledge and experience to be able to carry out that task. So maybe for that task, that person would be competent. Now, if I was to take that person and put them into a factory or an office and give them, a more complicated tester like the Apollo, would they still be competent? No. So again, it's about having sufficient knowledge and experience for the range of equipment you're going to come across, the type of test equipment you're using, and also being able to demonstrate that. So you really need evidence, and evidence really comes down to things like, training records, employment records, a bit of a CV, how long have you been doing it? So again, one of the things we get asked is what course makes me competent? And the actual answer is there isn't a course. You go and do a Sitting Girls 2377, you've passed the knowledge bit, the theory bit, there's a small practical test, but does that make you competent? Unfortunately not. And the person who makes you competent or specifies that you are competent is always the duty holder for the organisation or the company that you're working for. So it's down to the duty holder to actually decide, are you competent or not, based on their criteria, and then they need to ensure, because if anything goes wrong, they're the person who'll be asked by the HSE to say, why did you think competent? And they've got to provide why they did. So again, if you're employing people, if you're using subcontractors, all those sort of things, very, very important to actually meet standards, because at the end of the day, but it's really just about having enough knowledge and experience to be able to do the job, and also being able to should.
Excellent. Got another one that's come through. Product one from Paul Anderson, who's asking how you change the pass limits on the Prime Test 250 plus. What's your sort of thoughts on that? Is it they're preset in pass and fail, aren't they, Kev?
Yeah, 250 plus. Funny enough, as if by magic, and that wasn't a fix, I just happened to, this is how I roll, I just keep these things in my house. There's a setup button. So you press the setup button. Press the setup button. And if you press the last two button, it swaps between 250 and 500. Press the leakage button, it swaps between 0.75 3.5. So that's the only settings you can change. You can't change things like the earth continuity levels, fortunately, from that side of things. But obviously, being a manual tester, generally, you can record the down off the screen. So the pass fail indication on there is just telling you, look at the results. And obviously, if you look at it and say, actually, all right, 0.21 is actually okay because it's a long lead, you can obviously pass. If it's the 250 plus and you're downloading the results, obviously when you get onto the spreadsheet and you're putting in the asset like the location, you can just change fail to pass. Where you go. So it's with a manual tester, obviously there is an indication for it, but obviously it's pass fail decision. So although the pass are on the cautious side, they're trying to sort of help you out a bit for longer leads like that. They're just there as a reminder, and obviously down to you, competent that decision and that correctly.
I do just like the comment there from Kieran Fox as you pulled out the Prime Test 250. True Blue Peter style. Here's what we made earlier.
You don't want to see what else I've got lying around here from that kind of things. How are we doing time wise? 45 minutes in. 45 minutes in, Rich.
Well, we've got one as well here from Andy Parker. And if you asked him, if you can sort of maybe comment a bit further through is, are you going to update your iOS app for the series 500 and 600? iOS app, is that sort of the downloading to mobile device? Is that Andy, or is that any thoughts on?
Yeah, Andy, if you could just give us a bit more detail on that one, maybe. I'm not quite sure which app you're referring to on that. We do have various apps. Obviously, we've got our PAT mobile app, and we've also got our QR reader app and that sort of thing as well. So, I'm not quite sure which app you follow, 500 and 600, unless you mean PAT mobile for the 500. But again, generally, PAT mobile is really for manual testers. With the 500 and 600, the actual all the stuff you need is built into the tester anyway. So, there we go. There's a question popped up there about Selv. That leads us on to a beautiful bit for the 5th edition, Selv. Yeah, I mean, can I explain Selv? Yes, I can. So Selv stands for separated extra low voltage. Extra low voltage, anything less than 50 volts AC, 120 volts DC. So really it falls into that category. Separated means that it's separated from, so similar to electric shaver socket is electrically separated. It means that the actual secondary winding of the source is separated from earth, so you can't get a fault to earth with it. Now, Selv equipment generally in the PAT testing world is known as class 3 equipment. There's very little equipment that is actually class 3. Some of the Christmas lights and things like that you might come across for use outdoors can actually be class 3. Because remember, this is something people get very confused about, where they'll say something like a phone charger is class 3. Now, a phone charger has got 230 volts inside it, so it ain't ELV. So the output might be extra low voltage, but is it separated? And generally, it isn't separated anyway. So something like a phone probably wouldn't even class as class 3 from that side of things. So some Christmas lights you'll come across are class 3, and you'll see the little diamond symbol with the Roman numeral 3 inside it. That generally denotes that it is class 3 equipment. So Christmas lights is about one of the few things I can think of, maybe some pond lights and bits of stuff like that. But it's only actually the light that would be the class 3 equipment. The charger or the power supply, because there's mains going into it, is actually still either class 2 or class 1 equipment. Class 3 only refers to the equipment that's supplied at 50 volts or less and is electrically separated. Now, the reason I was saying that this fits in perfectly with the new 5th edition is in the new 5th edition, they've actually brought out a new class of equipment. They've actually classified it differently. There's been a change to the standards, and now in the new standards, manufacturers are actually using terms ES1, ES2, and ES3. So ES1 actually lines up with Selv, pretty much fits in with the Selv definition that we had previously. They don't 100% map over, so there is changes, but there's quite a bit in the appendices of the new code of practice that actually talk about the new classifications, ES1, ES2, ES3, and how that maps over with Selv, PELV, a normal main powered equipment. So keep an eye out for that one, because that's interesting. Hopefully that's giving you an example of Selv, but there's almost no class 3 equipment you'll come across. It's very, very, I think is class 3.
Excellent. There were a couple of questions earlier, say from Kieran, they're very much sort of based, Kieran Fox, around his label printer and labels and bits and pieces and showing that. So I think if you can kindly sort of touch base with us through the groups or the social media forums as you normally would, I'd be more than happy to set up a one-to-one session sort of live, and we can talk through some of your sort of specific questions you may have. If you just sort of touch base with me, we can sort that out at a time that's convenient for you, whilst obviously I'm working from home currently. And I think, Kev, that wraps up all the pre-registered questions, and I think the ones that have come through the live chat, a good number come through there, and a great variety.
Yeah, I think so, hopefully it's allowed us to get a bit of information out there. It's giving you something to do on an evening. But yeah, hopefully we can do more of these events, and it's something we're keen to do more And I think one of the things that's key is, obviously keep in touch with us. Um, you know, we're both available on social media. You can have a chat with us. And really, if you want different topics or anything you want us to cover in future events, please get in touch. As I say, we're tending to use for these events the events@seaward.com email address. But really get in touch with us anytime you want. I think there probably will be a recording of this going up. I think it automatically records it. So there'll probably be a recording of this event going up on YouTube if you want to share it with any of your colleagues or friends or anything like that. But again, while the current crisis is going on, please feel free to get in touch with us. We're always here to help. So I think at that point we'll call it quits and we'll let you get on with your evening and anything else you need. Obviously. Bye, Rich.
Thank you.
Bye.
So,